Welcome back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we believe in empowering people through storytelling and education. If you did not listen to last week's episode, make sure you go back and listen to it. It was so informative. I had Krista Bigler on, and we dove into the topic of eczema, and it was so fascinating because she talked about that there's different kinds, and just kind of dove really deep into treatments and signs and symptoms and all sorts of different stuff. And I learned so much from her. And one thing that she said that really stuck out to me, that I feel like you don't hear very often, is that if you're going to the doctor about something and they're telling you you can never eat this one food again, run in the other direction. Because I feel like I've done that before where I'm like, I have to cut out this one thing for the rest of my life or whatever. And that's like not the goal. Like obviously there are circumstances where there's like a severe allergy, like celiac disease. You are allergic to wheat. But a lot of people do have a lot of food sensitivities these days, and they think that they have to just cut something out forever. But that's actually a sign that the gut's trying to tell you. And if you could balance the gut and get it back to a place, you should be able to handle the different foods. So it was a super interesting conversation. And she talked about histamines a little, or not really, but like she brought it up. And that's something that I would love to learn more about, because I'm pretty sure that I have histamine issues. I think that's why my cheeks get flushed and rosacea. It's kind of related to that. So yeah, I'd like to dive into that one of these days, but make sure you go back and listen. There was so much information in there, and you can check out her Instagram, her podcast. She has so much information. This week, I'm really excited to talk about breastfeeding and low supply. There's so many misconceptions when it comes to low breast milk supply out there, and it can just be so damaging to new moms. And I think everyone's doing their best, but a lot of times we're getting information from people who aren't specialists. So your pediatrician is not a specialist in breastfeeding, and even lactation consultants might be really good at something, but maybe they're not great at diagnosing if there's like an actual issue going on, which we're going to get into in this episode. So it's really hard to get the support you need when you have an actual low supply. And so we're going to dive into it. And I'm so grateful for Kaia Lacy coming on and chatting with us about it. This is going to be the last episode for the year, guys. I'm excited. We're going to take a couple weeks off, spend time with family. I'm actually going to go on vacation and come back refreshed, renewed, hopefully with a tan. We'll see. I don't tan super well. I'm like, it takes a while for me to like build a little bit of a tan and then get a tan. So maybe I'll get a tan, maybe I won't. But I'm excited to just kind of get away for a while and come back in the new year. If you're listening, make sure that you are subscribed and that you leave a review. That's the best way to spread the podcast around. Share it with your friends and family who need to hear it. Let me know who you want to have on, what topics you want to have on, and I will do my best to make that happen. I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, and we're going to dive into this episode. All right, everyone, we have Kaia Lacy here with us today, and I'm super excited about this conversation. She is the low supply mom, and I found her on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, and I think somebody had like shared one of your posts in their stories, and then I went to your account, and there's just so much good information on there about low supply when it comes to breastfeeding, and I knew that I wanted to have this episode because of the shame, the guilt, the misconceptions, the myths, so much that comes with milk supply. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation with you. So thank you so much for coming on today, Kaia.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I mean, you know, I really got into this because when I was a pregnant lady anticipating breastfeeding, I thought I'm going to exclusively nurse. I'm going to do it until my child's like 3 to 5. And I had, all these ambitions, and I wasn't aware of the prevalence and the reality of low milk supply. And so, after my son was born, I went through a really difficult time, kind of confronting that reality and just a lack of support in the space of, how do we support parents like that? And so it really it inspired me and motivated me to kind of start a platform that could offer the support that I needed in, my own journey. And so it's been really healing in that way, in that regard. It's, I'm able to kind of be the person that I needed myself for other people now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. It is hard because I feel like, so you're a certified lactation consultant, and I even know, like with me as a doula, I've had people tell me before that they hired a doula and they like didn't do anything like throughout the birth. And I'm like, what? I'm like, that's not our job. That's not what we do. Like it's bad representation. And I'm sure that happens with you as a lactation consultant, having like maybe people coming to you and be like, well, my lactation consultant told me like, I just wasn't doing it right. Like that low supply is maybe not a thing, or that, that the latch was fine when it wasn't, or anything like that. So what has been like your experience becoming a lactation consultant?
Yeah. So, so I'm a CLC. I'm a certified lactation counselor, which is different from the IBCLC. But, it's really difficult because when I went through this, I actually, I went through a period of time where I had a lot of resentment towards providers. Just because of my own experience, I wasn't, seen, my problems weren't identified. I wasn't given proper support from a number of lactation consultants, and then in becoming a lactation consultant, I became a part of a community of other CLCs, other IBCLCs who are all amazing, wonderful providers. But it really did open my mind to the fact that, providers are individuals and none of them are going to be created equal. None of them are going to have the same knowledge base. And so, it really is individualized. And I think that, as far as, when we come into contact with IBCLCs or CLCs or CVS, whatever, those breastfeeding support providers who aren't providing proper care, I think a lot of times, that's a reflection of the fact that lactation is so nuanced, and the physiology of lactation is, it's so embedded in science and biology. And, a lot of times we want to simplify it by saying something like, oh, it's just supply and demand. And, unfortunately for a lot of these issues with lactation, the research and the science has been, over a period of the last 10 to 15 years. And there's a huge lag when it comes to research being implemented and integrated in provider curriculum. So that's one of the biggest problems we're seeing, is that it's not that IBCLCs or whoever don't care. It's that they have not been trained in this in a capacity that we need. So there's, the promotion of breastfeeding, which has brought a lot more people into, this desire and practice, but that hasn't been balanced with integrating education for the people who need to support it. But, all that being said, like, I have met some amazing LCs. I've also met some that I would not refer anyone to. It's really dependent on the person.
Yeah, 100%. And you find that in every area of healthcare. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to find somebody who you click with, and find a provider who's willing to, like, not everything's a one size fits all, like just meet your individual needs, which can be hard, especially if it's in like a certain environment where insurance is covering it and they only have so much time with you. And, it's like the system's just.
Yeah. And that's a big part of it is, a lot of times I hear from clients, I saw a lactation consultant in the hospital and they said XYZ and it didn't work and it just was blown off. The thing is, like, this is part of a systemic issue as well. Right. In that when we have lactation consultants who are placed in the hospital, they also, on their shift, they're making rounds in several rooms, and they have these time constraints that come from, higher up. Mm-hmm. And so it's really, it's unfortunate for the provider. It's unfortunate for the patient. And, so the most support we see is usually in those private spaces where, after birth or prenatally, which is, a really good practice is to see someone prenatally. Those private practice providers they have the capacity to support you in a way that's necessary, because a lot of times in the hospital, the system doesn't allow it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, that makes total sense. We are going to take a break from this episode so I can share with you one of my favorite new brands to partner with, and that is Dadgrass. And you can go to dadgrass.com/mamas to get 20% off your first order. But let me tell you a little bit about them. Dadgrass is legal, organic, smokable hemp that relaxes your body and mellows your mind. Their 100% organic pre-rolled joints are very low in THC and high in CBD, so you can enjoy the effects of CBD while keeping a clear head. You can chill out without getting stoned, and it's like having a glass of wine, but not the whole bottle. All Dadgrass products are federally legal for ages 21 and over, and it ships right to your door anywhere in the U.S. So whether you're looking for a way to chill and enjoy your favorite shows at the end of the day, Dadgrass will leave you in a euphoric mood. Since I am pregnant, I have not tried it yet, but Vito has, and he's actually really enjoyed it. He's never really been big on CBD or THC, either one. And then we received the product, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to try it out. And he's really enjoyed it. It's helped him kind of relax at the end of the day and just kind of mellow out before going to bed. And it's not just for dads, guys. It's for moms too. They have mom grass as well. So make sure that you check them out. And Dadgrass is offering our listeners 20% off your first order when you go to dadgrass.com/mamas. Go to dadgrass.com/mamas for 20% off your first order. That's dadgrass.com/mamas. So let's dive into low supply, because again, there's just so much misinformation surrounding it, and it's really disheartening for everybody involved. So for moms who are being told that it's their problem, like you don't actually have low supply, you're not doing it right, or you're not pumping enough, or you're not taking the right supplements, if those even work, I don't know. And so is low supply actually a thing, and how do you know if you have it?
Yeah. So, that's one of the biggest things I shout from the rooftops, is that low supply is real. It's very nuanced. It's not something like, I don't know, if someone has, an endocrine issue, and so we say, we have thyroid dysfunction. Low supply isn't like this all-encompassing condition that looks like one thing. First, I think it's important to establish what is low milk supply, right? So low milk supply isn't defined by a certain volume. Each baby, by a month old until about 6 months old, they take anywhere from 19 to 30 ounces a day. And it's all based on the individual child's volume requirements, right? So low milk supply is when the mother is unable to produce and match that specific volume requirement. There are separate causes to low milk supply, which are categorized as primary and secondary. And the primary would be, any anatomical or physical barriers to lactation that exist within the mother, whereas secondary are interferences that happened outside of the mother after birth. And some examples of secondary, because secondary is what's most common with low supply. So with secondary, what happens is, it can be rooted in transfer issues. Maybe baby has a tongue tie or high palate or a weak suck reflex, and that is limiting the efficiency of draining the breast. So anything with secondary low supply has to do with limited draining and efficiency in moving milk, because especially in, the first 3 weeks after life or after childbirth, moving that milk and draining the breast efficiently does dictate a lot of later lactation. Secondary low supply is interesting in that it's depending on, when these interruptions are occurring. It can be long-term, or it can a lot of times be resolved. But, it's really nuanced, and that gets left out of the conversation with low supply a lot, is that, a lot of times we'll hear, oh, you had a dip in supply, just pump more, and then it'll all come back. And, the nuance is that that'll work for a lot of people. That won't work for everyone. Mm-hmm. It depends on how old your baby is, how long the draining issues or frequency or efficiency barriers have been ongoing. It depends on how old you are as a mother, how much supplementation has been provided. It's not cut and dry. It's very nuanced. And so, I've known mothers who have secondary low supply who are told, oh, you don't have true low supply. But the thing is, here's a for example, you have a baby's in the NICU. No one's told you to pump. Mm-hmm. You finally hear that you should pump 3 days later. You start pumping 3 times a day. Then you learn a week later, oh, I actually need to be pumping a lot more often. So you start pumping, and then by 2 weeks, you're getting more information. You start doing all the things, doing everything correctly. For some of those people, or more often, a lot of them, if we're not getting that draining and efficiency within those first few weeks, it can cause true low supply, because you truly cannot make the amount of milk your baby needs to exclusively breastfeed. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so unfortunate, because a lot of these parents with secondary low supply are told, oh, well, you don't have low milk supply. Mm-hmm. Just because they don't have an anatomical or biological barrier to lactation, right? So secondary low milk supply, we don't know the prevalence of. And, in honesty, secondary low milk supply is something that a lot of people don't even regard as low milk supply, because for so many it can be reversed. But that doesn't negate the reality that it absolutely impacts, a large volume of women. And that, for some of them, it's like, no matter how much pumping or hand expressing or draining you're doing, you can increase your milk production after a certain extent. Mm-hmm. So then secondary is all about efficiency, all about frequency and draining. And then we have primary. So primary low supply has to do with any sort of, biological, anatomical factor that is inhibiting or interfering with lactation. And those are the things where, where a secondary low supply, a lot of times we can boost your supply. And more often we can get you close to exclusive breastfeeding, if not exclusively breastfeeding. With primary low supply, that's not possible. At least not within one mother-baby dyad, because it changes, right, from child to child. So there's a number of causes that can contribute to primary low supply, but it's, the overarching influence in a lot of the causes is hormonal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And how would you even know if that was you?
For primary?
Yeah.
Okay. So with primary low supply, there's actually quite a few symptoms that are outlined that are experienced by a lot of people with primary low supply. One of the biggest is no breast changes in pregnancy. And this is actually something that I didn't know when I was pregnant because, you know, I have primary low supply and I gained 60 pounds when I was pregnant with my son. But even within that, I didn't have to go up in one single bra size. Like my breasts just didn't change at all in pregnancy. And so that's a really big flag that we have to look out for and screen mothers for, because no breast changes in pregnancy is, you know, it can be indicative of no glandular growth in pregnancy, which, you know, pregnancy is such a crucial time for developing that tissue that you need for lactation. So no breast changes in pregnancy and also no breast changes postpartum. So oftentimes, you know, in mothers who exclusively breastfeed, your body goes through this hormonal cascade of events where, you know, in pregnancy, your hormones are creating glandular tissue. Your breasts are becoming larger. And then once you're in childbirth, once the placenta leaves your body, that triggers a hormonal response to hike up your hormone prolactin, to set receptors in that glandular tissue to make milk. And then what you experience is engorgement, right? So you have, to some extent, some growth after baby's born.
Yeah.
So
sorry, the baby's like really kicking me hard in the ribs right now. So I'm like, oh, okay, continue. I just need to like stretch my ribs out or something.
I know, I saw your face, said hello.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I kept feeling it. And then there was a big one. So continue, please.
Okay. No. So we usually see, you know, that engorgement postpartum. So that's a lot of times not seen with primary low supply. So no breast changes in pregnancy, no breast changes after birth. You know, a lot of the conditions that we know can be connected to primary low supply are, again, those that can impact your endocrine system, your hormonal health. And so those are conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome, hypothyroidism, hyperprolactinemia, which we see often in mothers who have had prior fertility issues, or, you know, luteal phase defect is a big one there. You know, breast surgeries and anything anatomical that would, like a breast injury that would interrupt the growth there. Insulin resistance. I mean, this list goes on and on and on. Yeah. If, you know, oh shoot, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. It's so hard, you know, it's so hard to summarize this, because one of the biggest qualms I have, one of the biggest issues I have is that, you know, people say low supply isn't real. So, you know, the first thing we can do to combat that is say, no, low supply is real. But then it does become really difficult in discussing it, because not only is it real, but it's so nuanced, right? There's all sorts of things that can contribute to it, and no two people have the same experience with it. And so, really, you know, for primary low supply, if you've had any history of irregular periods, of fertility issues, of, you know, obesity and puberty is a big one. Anything that could have impacted your hormonal health puts you at higher risk of having primary low supply.
All right. So we're going to take a quick break. I know I've talked on here before about Stitch Fix and how much I have loved using them. And I want to talk to you about Stitch Fix Freestyle. I've been slowly transforming my closet into a place that I actually like. I feel like for a really long time that it's just been like frumpy clothes, comfy, which there's definitely nothing wrong with comfy, but you can also have comfy and confidence and have something that you actually feel good in. And I want to tell you about the Stitch Fix Freestyle. It is your trusted style destination where you can discover and instantly buy curated items based on your style, likes, and lifestyle. So whether you're looking for a specific brand that you love or to try a new one, at Stitch Fix Freestyle, you can shop a range of over 1,000 brands personalized to your size and fit. Plus, there's no subscription required. They offer free shipping, returns, and exchanges, and you can find something for any occasion. Comfy, business, whatever it is, maternity. I know last year with Jovi, when I was pregnant with Jovi, I got quite a few outfits from there that I absolutely loved, just like sundresses that were flowy. So I am doing it again, transforming my closet into a place that I actually enjoy being in, that I can confidently walk in and pick up any article of clothing and be confident wearing it. So get started today by filling out your style quiz at stitchfix.com/mamas. That's stitchfix.com/mamas to try Stitch Fix Freestyle. stitchfix.com/mamas. And so when you do have primary low supply, like you said, it's nuanced. So I guess this probably, I mean, it's a generic question that I'm asking, but I'm sure the answer is different for every person. So you're able to produce some, just not meet your baby's needs.
So it's really, it is really nuanced in that it's vast. The answer is different for everyone. Let me give you a few examples of how these primary conditions influence. Okay. So let's look at thyroid, insulin resistance, and IgT. So if we look at thyroid dysfunction and how that can impact lactation and cause low supply, there's a couple different factors there. So one is, depending on how long thyroid dysfunction has been present, it can impact that growth in pregnancy and or in puberty. And those are the two most influential times when you grow that glandular tissue necessary for lactation. Apart from that, your thyroid also dictates, when you, especially with oxytocin, the pituitary gland is what creates this, TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone. So that's then sent to your thyroid, and then your thyroid tells your body how much of these hormones to put out. So sometimes what we see with hypothyroid and lactation is that, perhaps it interrupted some glandular growth. So you have a smaller storage capacity. Your breasts are able to hold a smaller amount of milk. But then the secondary influence is that you have trouble with, adequate oxytocin signaling. So you can be nursing your baby or pumping for 30 minutes and not have a letdown. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that's more common with hypothyroid. And then, as a secondary cause with that, then you have milk trapped in the breasts. The breasts aren't being emptied efficiently. That down regulates your, whatever prolactin receptors you do have in your breasts. And so then your supply decreases in that way. Mm-hmm. So, that's one primary cause. That's, thyroid dysfunction or hypothyroid in particular. Then you look at something like insulin resistance. So when you are, when your breasts are developing, it's, the mammary gland is something that goes through a process of what's called branching morphogenesis, which is why we see it depicted as like a blooming tree a lot of times, is because, when you're, a fetus, you have these rudimentary buds, and especially in puberty and pregnancy, those buds, what happens is they do branch out and they take on, limbs, as it were. And then the flowers are really grown in pregnancy. And so when you're developing this tissue in puberty and pregnancy, you develop this, it's all made up of clusters of these cells called alveoli. And alveoli are later where all the milk production happens. Mm-hmm. So during pregnancy, because of the high levels of progesterone from your placenta, what happens with this alveoli is that these certain cells form inside this alveoli, and they're called lactocytes. And those lactocytes are specifically where your milk is made. And so with insulin resistance, what we see is that they actually impede communication with your body and your lactocytes. So if you have insulin resistance, sometimes the influence of that is that, after baby's born, your body's not communicating correctly with these small cells inside other cells that are responsible for making milk. Mm-hmm. And so, it can also impact, because there's that communication error, it can even impact the growth of those cells to begin with. Mm-hmm. Right. So, then we have something called IGT, which IGT is insufficient glandular tissue, and can be caused by any of these endocrine dysfunctions, especially in puberty, or environmental toxins in utero. There does seem to be a genetic component as well, in that it can be inherited. But with insufficient glandular tissue, you develop an amount of glandular tissue that you do not have the capacity to exclusively breastfeed. And that's like the bottom line there. Mm-hmm. So, when we say so if you have primary low supply, does that mean that you just don't make anything, or you make some? It depends on what your root cause is. Mm-hmm. I have met parents that have IGT that literally they can't make anything. They didn't make colostrum. They didn't make milk. I've met moms with IGT who made 15 to 17 ounces of milk a day. So it's a wide spectrum here. It's not like, oh, you have you have insufficient glandular tissue, therefore you make 3 ounces a day. Or, you have insulin resistance, therefore you have slow refill. It's just, these things impact people on such an individualized level, that there's this broad range, and you could have low supply and make 30 milliliters a day. You can have low supply and make 15 ounces a day. Mm-hmm. It's just so varied,
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's wild how detailed it gets. And it just sounds like you really have to find the right support and the right people to work with you to completely understand. 'Cause I'm sure there's people that may have primary low supply, but again, they're just being told you need to pump more. You're not doing it right. They didn't know that they had a root cause causing any of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times, a lot of that happens because with secondary low supply, right? Generally what can increase supply is more stimulation, more draining. And, it's interesting because when you have secondary low supply and you are trying to boost your supply, it's actually considered relactation, because those lactocytes that I was talking about, so those are your prolactin receptors. That's where you're making milk in your breasts. What happens when those aren't used after birth is they begin to involute and shut down. So when you have secondary low milk supply, you have those receptors. They've just shut down, and that's why they're not making a proper amount of milk. So when you have secondary low supply and you want to increase it, what you want to do is you're trying to wake up those receptors so that they can make milk. So that's why we're told, if you have low supply, pump more, nurse more, bring baby to breast. Because for secondary low supply, that can be very beneficial. And a lot of people, they can wake up a lot of those receptors. Not always to the extent to exclusively breastfeed again, but generally they will be able to increase their milk supply somewhat. Mm-hmm. The problem is when we're talking about primary low supply, most of these causes do limit the growth of the glandular tissue. So telling someone with primary low supply, you just need to pump more, you just need to efficiently drain, when they literally do not have those cells in their body, mm-hmm. they're maxed out. All their prolactin receptors are up and running. It's just kind of cruel, honestly, because then we fall into this notion that I'm just not trying hard enough. or I'm doing it wrong. And, when the truth is, it's not about effort in those instances. It's about your biology.
Mm-hmm. Right. So how effective are, because I remember when I was getting ready to have my first, people saying that you need to, make sure that you have like lactation cookies, that you have these supplements, all these different things that help with supply. Do those things actually work?
So I always say this: if you want to eat some cookies, if things make you feel happy, do that. The scientific evidence is very low for herbal galactagogues. And the quality of that evidence is to say, in some people, this may help a little bit with supply. To an extent that's really something worth writing home about or investing hundreds of dollars in, probably not. Science tells us that the most beneficial thing for increasing supply is going to be additional stimulation, additional draining. One thing you can do if you're pregnant and you're thinking about investing in herbs and cookies or whatever, this sounds like I'm trying to make a sale here, but talk to a lactation consultant.
Yeah.
But apart from that, there are practices you can do in pregnancy that are going to help you make more milk later. Research has shown that hand expressing within the first 3 days after childbirth, in addition to nursing, so say you're nursing according to hunger, so it's probably every 1 to 2 hours, round the clock. If you hand express as well, not, for 20 minutes each time, but just a few minutes throughout the day. If you do that 6 times daily within the first 3 days, research has shown you will have 45% more milk in later lactation. Wow. And the influences of that goes back to the science of what we were talking about with those lactocytes, with setting prolactin receptors. The higher your prolactin in that immediate postpartum period, the more opportunity you have to set more of those receptors. If you've previously dealt with a lower supply or a smaller storage capacity, or, you're hoping to make an abundance of milk, that's something that I think is really worth exploring. Hand expressing in pregnancy to harvest colostrum is also a really beneficial practice. We do see that supplementation in the hospital following, a 7 to 10% loss is common in a lot of parents with low supply. And harvesting colostrum in pregnancy to provide them with postpartum is a great practice because, if baby is at 7% and they're saying, well, you might need to supplement soon, you have your colostrum, which is one of the most nutrient dense, it has so many immunologic properties in it that are so beneficial. And giving that colostrum in hospital, what it can do is it can give baby more energy to feed efficiently and stay awake for feeds. And so in that way, providing colostrum in hospital is really beneficial. With my second child, I harvested colostrum when I was pregnant, and I just gave it to her right away in the hospital because I said, I want her to have energy to feed. And this isn't going to be over supplementation because it's, literally 1 milliliter of colostrum. Right. And we know that all babies we can expect most babies to lose up to 7% of their birth weight. So, I might just give her this extra. Maybe she only loses 5%, but now she's got more energy to feed efficiently and drain my breasts and help me in setting those prolactin receptor sites. So, if you want to get the cookies, if you want to get the herbs, go and get them. But the most beneficial thing you can do is understand the physiology of lactation, because that's going to help steer you towards better milk production, much more so than a brownie,
Right, yeah, for sure. So how important is it? I have two questions for like immediately postpartum. I've been told like everyone just needs to start pumping. Like as soon as you have the baby, start pumping. Is that true? Because I loathe pumping. I pumped with my daughter because I went back to work and even like, I had to quit because even just after I got pregnant, I'm still nursing my daughter. And, if I wouldn't pump regularly, I could barely pump at all. So if I got called into a birth and I'm trying to pump there, like one time I was pumping for like 30 minutes and I got not even an ounce from both sides. And I hate washing pump parts. I hate everything about it. So I'm like, with this next baby, I mean, do I have to pump to help milk come in? Or can I had to pump with my daughter though. She was in the NICU for a week. So I had to either way. But like, do I need to like, once this baby's born, start pumping to make sure that milk's coming in? Or can I just kind of do what you're saying, like hand express, like the first few days?
Okay. The good news is like, unless you're outside the home working a full-time job,
right.
Sometimes pumping is necessary. For those of us who stay at home with our children, who are generally nearby, who only have to be draining, intermittently, or, I mean, honestly, some people who work do this too. You don't have to pump ever. You can hand express, which honestly, hand expression is, I love hand expressing. And I'll tell you why. Because with my son, I was on that pump too. And that whole thing, that like, just hearing that, I just can't. I'm triggered, you know? Mm-hmm. So I learned a lot about hand expression in my pregnancy with Nora and, even more so when I was becoming a CLC. And it's amazing how beneficial and how efficient hand expressing is. So as far as people being told, you need to pump immediately after baby's born, one, pumping is not great after baby's born because you're producing colostrum and you can't get that colostrum out with a pump very well. So hand expressing within the first 5 days until your, body starts really transitioning from colostrum to milk, we really want to be getting that colostrum, moving that colostrum out so that, that milk can come in with abundance, right? So hand expressing is what will help you do that with colostrum. So if you're using a pump before about 5 days postpartum, it's depressing for a lot of us, right? We're not getting anything.
Yeah.
It is good to stimulate your nipples because that will heighten prolactin response. But the name of the game is getting that colostrum, getting that milk out. And that needs to be done with hand expressing. Hand expressing is also really beneficial because you don't have the moving parts of a pump, right? You don't have the pumping bra and the tubes and, that like pumping beat that drives us a little crazy and the bottles and the washing. With hand expressing, it's a bit of a learning curve, but you can hand express anywhere. You can hand express into a bottle. You can hand express into a spoon. You can, you can store it in the same ways that you would with pumped milk. A lot of times the time it would take you to pump a certain amount of milk, you can get that hand expressing much faster. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because, the warmth of your hand and that pressure and that massage, that is going to increase your oxytocin release, which is going to help with your letdown. So you're going to get more milk faster. Mm-hmm. Some people find that they may get marginally more with a pump. And that's generally not after birth. That's usually around 6 to 8 weeks after supply is regulated. Their bodies become very conditioned to a pump. Mm-hmm. But I mean, my advice is always like, ditch the pump, just hand express. You're going to be a lot happier. It's so much more sustainable. It is absolutely not necessary to pump after childbirth. Mm-hmm. And, if you're going back to work at 6 weeks, because we live in America and that's what they make us do.
Yeah.
if you are concerned about, well, I need to start pumping because I need to get a stash or whatever, I generally advise, don't worry about that immediately postpartum. You have about a month that your milk supply is building. Maybe at 3 weeks, you pump once a day at night, and you start building that way. Maybe you wait until a month. Maybe you start the week before you go back to work. There's so many right ways to do this. And, I don't want anyone to have in the back of their mind when unless their goal is like, I want to exclusively pump with my babe.
Right.
I don't want anyone to have to think like, when do I have to start pumping? Because there's such a learning curve we're all going through. The first week postpartum, like, this, it's just like all you do is feed a child and you're tired and literally just like a child lives on your breast. Right. So, don't concern yourself with pumping. Unless your child has a transfer issue, unless there's something that, indicates pumping is necessary. You don't have to pump.
Yeah.
Don't pump.
Yeah.
Don't pump postpartum.
Thanks. I needed to hear that. I don't want to. I have kind of that was my other question for postpartum was, when does your milk come in? Because that's another thing that you hear people say, like, oh, my milk just never came in, or I wasn't I'm not producing enough yet.
Right.
Type thing.
Yeah. So this kind of goes both ways, right? So I hear people say, oh, my milk never came in. And there's that, it goes back to this notion that like, we think like, okay, we have a baby, we're going to have milk, which that doesn't happen immediately, right? There's a transition from colostrum to mature milk. And that phase is called lactogenesis 2. So lactogenesis 1 is when your body starts making colostrum. Lactogenesis 2 is when your milk comes in, right? So when your colostrum starts to transition from colostrum to white milk. So that should happen within the first 72 hours postpartum. For some mothers, it can happen a little bit later. With C-section, we see that oftentimes there can be a delay in that lactogenesis 2. So, if you're having a C-section, it may not come in until day 4, day 5. Also, with insulin resistance, with gestational diabetes, your milk may not come in until a little bit later, which oftentimes means we're going to need to supplement in the hospital, or birthing center or home or wherever you are, wherever you're popping that thing out. So a lot of times people will say, oh, my milk didn't come in, and they just haven't been informed about the natural process there. On the flip side, I hear clients who say, my milk didn't come in, and they're just told, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. And their milk didn't come in until day 7 or 8,
right, yeah.
or, when they went through that lactogenesis 2, their milk just didn't come in to an extent that was, a volume necessary to exclusively breastfeed. So I think, understanding lactogenesis 2, that transition from 1 to 2 is really important. So it should, when baby is born, we'll see that thick, dense, sticky colostrum. And then about 3 days after birth, you should see that colostrum transitioning from that yellow, sticky, thick to thinner white. And that transition should only start within those 72 hours. So, it's okay if you don't have like water consistency milk by day 3, but you should see the start of that transition. And one of the things that helps speed that transition between 1 and 2 is hand expressing colostrum in pregnancy. So they found that if you do that, if you collect your colostrum in pregnancy, it actually hastens the time. So a lot of people will then go from colostrum to seeing that milk start to transition by day 2, or within the first 24 hours, which is, great. I think that answers it. I tend to go on tangents.
No, it's great. I'm learning a lot. My problem with pregnancy right now is my nipples are so sensitive that I'm still breastfeeding Jovi. just before nap and bedtime, and I like wince, and I've cried a couple times. But I'm not ready to wean her, and she's not ready, and so it's like so hard, but it's so painful. And I've tried to like hand express. I'm like, is she even getting anything right now? And like a little like thing of milk will form on my nipple, but it's like so painful that I'm like, when is this gonna end? Is this gonna end?
Yeah, and that tenderness. So in the second trimester, which you're in second trimester, right?
Yes, I'm in the last week of my second trimester right now.
Okay, so I always get these weeks wrong. I want to say it is 18 to 28 weeks, but don't quote me on it. That is when that's when you're seeing the most change in your breast in pregnancy. So you've probably seen a lot of growth, right, in these last few weeks. Mm-hmm. So within that, yeah, like part of it is that your nipples are going to be really tender.
It's so bad. I don't remember them hurting this bad last time. Like,
well, you didn't have someone nursing on them.
That's true. I didn't have someone still attached to them.
Well, and I'm sure that Jovi, I mean, how old is Jovi?
She's 15 months.
Yeah, so she knows what she's doing. She's real efficient, and she knows how to like really pull the milk out. So part of it is probably that.
Yeah, because I can hear that she's like swallowing, like she's getting some.
But you know what? It's really common for babies also, and you know, some people in pregnancy will, you know, you will go back to that transition in pregnancy where you are gonna, you know, if you're nursing your first child, you're pregnant with your second child, your body's going to transition back to colostrum, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so what happens with a lot of babies is they adapt to just comfort nursing.
Yeah.
So taking very, very small amounts, if anything, mm-hmm. and just suckling at the breast. And that's really what sustains breastfeeding until baby number 2 comes. And mm-hmm. then, you know, if you're into it, you can tandem feed.
Yeah.
And, you know, so the comfort nursing that a lot of people do in pregnancy, that's what a lot of low supply moms do just as their form of breastfeeding. And it's really beneficial to babies to continue to breastfeed, even if you don't produce any milk, which is like this wild thought. I had a client recently who's actually also a provider, and she was like, yeah, I want a comfort nurse, but I know that that's like considered weird. You know, I know that people don't understand it. And it's like, why would you do that? But there are like immense benefits to comfort nursing, and the sustained skin to skin practice you get with that mm-hmm. Has long-term effects. There was actually a 2020 study that came out about long-term outcomes from skin to skin bonding, which we get with nursing. Mm-hmm. And these babies, like cognitively and when they look at the bond between mother and child, they're more responsive to one another. And so, you know, comfort nursing is one of those things that I like to talk about a lot because it's so beneficial and beautiful. And if you like it and if the baby likes it, there's nothing weird about it, you know?
Right, yeah. Because, I mean, you hear all the things like, oh, they're just using you as a pacifier. Oh, they don't need to, like, nurse anymore. Right. If you're fine with it, it's fine.
Yeah. I mean, so I still comfort nurse my 2.5-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And, you know, she may use me as a pacifier, but it's a wonderful thing to feel needed in that way, to be able to pacify her with my body, mm-hmm. you know, and that's what's made it so worth it to me is, you know, seeing that it is meaningful for her and that she'll fall down and she'll say, I want boob, mm-hmm. you know, or she'll be tired and we'll be cuddling and she'll say, I want boob. And I love that. I mm-hmm. love that, you know, my body in its own variation, in its own spectrum of normal and not making lots of milk can still provide that. Mm-hmm. You know, it's still perfect to her. She's completely happy with it. You know?
Before we wrap up, I would love for you to touch on, for moms who have low supply or maybe even no supply, how they can get those benefits to that contact, that comfort, if they're like being told, oh, well, your baby's not getting this benefit from you anymore since you're not breastfeeding them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's one thing I really struggled with my son. So I didn't know a lot about low supply, and I had, it was framed in such polarities with providers. It was either, well, you just need to keep trying. You'll make enough milk eventually, or you don't make any milk. You need to just stop breastfeeding. You know, with Nora, I found this middle. But a lot of us experience those polarities. And for some of us, you know, we will stop breastfeeding because, you know what, there's so much anxiety and insufficiency, and just it's not healthy when we're in this position, when we're told so many conflicting things. So, you know, if you have moved to exclusive formula or exclusive donor milk, like, I just hope that you rest assured you will still have a beautiful bond with your child. You know, I just talked about this a couple days ago, in that when we look at the bonding benefits of nursing, the number one influence of what bonds you while nursing is skin to skin. It's oxytocin. So research tells us that increased oxytocin is what creates that bond. So, you know, if you're not nursing, if you're, however you're feeding, looking for these modes of, you know, what makes me happy? What can I do together? What can we do together? Because that's what's increasing your oxytocin, right? And experiencing that together. So it can be physical touch. It can be spending time outside. It can be listening to music together and dancing. It can be going on a walk. It can be, you know, having that shared movement. So much of, what skin to skin research tells us is that, you know, they took, in this 2020 long-term study, they took mothers who did skin to skin about 6 times a day and those who didn't. And, you know, the bond here was very incredible. They did the still face task challenge, I think it's called, where, you know, a child will look at their mother and their mother will become non-responsive. Children who had a lot of that physical connection, they responded about a month earlier in becoming upset when their mom stopped looking at them than children who didn't have that physical touch. So, you know, what that tells us is that that physical connection is so vital to our bond, right? And that's not just, you know, something with breastfeeding, because there were mothers here in the non-skin to skin group who did breastfeed, and their babies, same thing, you know, their babies didn't respond to the still face task the same as skin to skin babies. So, you know, that doesn't mean you have to walk around naked with your baby attached to your back all day long. It just means making time for that connection, whether it's, you know, in sleep or, you know, before nap or during story time or during a walk, or, you know, it's more about the oxytocin boost you have in connecting in that way. So just find what makes you happy, find what boosts your oxytocin, because research tells us that's what's going to bond you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I would love for you to tell everyone where to connect with you, where to find you, if they want to book a session with you, where they can do that at. And also just thank you so much. I learned so much today. I didn't really know anything about low supply. Like I said, the things that I've basically been told is there's really no such thing. If you say you have low supply, you weren't trying hard enough, which we know is completely not true.
Yeah.
So,
and I appreciate that. I love talking about it. And I know that it's really hard for me to condense it because it is so nuanced, right? Yeah. And, you know, I appreciate having the opportunity to kind of bring up this scientific juggle that can be so confusing, and there's so much more to learn about it. Even, you know, I don't know everything about it. Right. And it's an amazing thing when we dive into the physiology of our bodies and of lactation. There's so much to learn, but, you know, if you want to learn more, I have a lot of educational posts and info up on my Instagram, which is Low Supply Mom. And I book sessions for one-on-one lactation support. I work exclusively with low supply parents, or mostly with low supply parents. But I try to primarily focus on that. And you can book a session on my website, which is lowsupplymom.com. And on the website, there's also a free PDF called The Science Behind Low Milk Supply that, in kind of a more linear way, because it's very hard to have these conversations, outlines a lot of what we've talked about. So it goes over, what are the signs of low supply, the factors involved, and really digs into those issues one by one with primary conditions.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you again so much. And I'm going to have the links to all of that in the show notes. So thank you again for your time and energy today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I had so much fun talking with Kaia. I told my husband afterwards, I'm like, she just seems like somebody that I would hang out with, because he always makes fun of me because I'm always like, well, research shows this and data says that. And I love diving into that kind of stuff, like getting deep into topics and really seeing, what does the data show us? What is this saying? What does research say? And I feel like she and I could just geek out on that kind of stuff all day together. And she just seemed like such a cool person. So I'm really grateful for her coming on and for educating us. I had no idea that about primary low supply and secondary low supply, and that there was a difference in all the different factors that could be affecting your milk supply. And so I'm really glad that she brought that information. And I just really hope anybody who's listening, that you never feel ashamed for your feeding journey. Everybody's on a different journey, and it's nobody else's business. Like, everybody's doing the best that they can for their kids. And so it's not there are things that do affect our milk supply, but even if you're just choosing to go a different route, even if it's too stressful or not for you, that's okay. And you need people in your life who are going to be supportive of that. The last thing you need is somebody making you feel guilty for how you're feeding your child. So I think that we carry around enough guilt in ourselves. So if you're looking for that kind of support and you don't have that in your life, make sure that you join our Miraculous Mamas Facebook group. The people in there are just so supportive and loving, and everybody's kind of had their own thing happen or go on and willing to share and support. So I'd love for you guys to be a part of that. And like I said, this is it for the year. This is it. It's Christmas week. I thought about doing a Christmas episode, but I was like, let's just continue the education, because I just have really awesome guests coming on right now. And everybody celebrates the holidays differently. So I hope that you get some time with family, some time away from work, and just really get to be able to connect however that looks for you. I know sometimes the holidays aren't great for every person. So just that you get some rest, relaxation, recovery, and just take care of yourself during this season. And I will see you in the new year. I love you guys so much. Happy New Year.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies, and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.